One second, Shalom Aleichem. Sunday, Parshas Kisei Tovshim Pegim. Bruchem habom b'shem Hashem Shehecheyanu v'kmanu yom hazman hazeh. Boruch Hashem, standing a new man with Shurim through Arav Agon of Yakov Zef Smishlite, Mamesh and Machayev, it's good to start the Shurim again. Today's topic is Mazel Tov, it's a girl. We should have a lot of Simchas. Rabbi Smishlite.
First of all, Shalom Aleichem to all of you. It's good to be back. And today we're going to start with a very interesting and challenging sugya, a group of questions that I've been collecting over the years regarding Taka, like we said. Like we said, the question when someone is zayich to have a baby girl, and the various questions that come up. Amongst them, we had a shayla where someone's father passed away. His father's name was Boruch. Could he give his daughter Bracha, naming after the father? Bechlal, when do you give the name? Right away, the first laining, Shabbos, the second Shabbos. Does he have to get an aliya? And a host of other questions. And we had an interesting question where someone had many boys. And he wanted to know, is he allowed to daven for the birth of a girl? So it could be that this sugi is connected, all the shals are really one. But let's try to go in order. We'll organize it in order of the way it happens, and hopefully one question will lead to the other. The first question someone has by the birth of a girl is there any bracha to be said? We all know the Gemara in Brachas Nuntes and Shulchan Aruch Reish Chav Gimel Aleph. When someone has a baby boy, he makes the bracha Toiv HaMeitiv. The Mishnah says, even if he doesn't actually see the son, he could be out of town. But the mere fact that he has a p'soira toiva, he has a good news that his wife had a baby boy, you make the bracha atoiv ha'meitiv. But if you note the lashon, both in Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara, yol the ishtay zachar. It seems that the bracha is said when a baby boy is born. That seems to imply on the birth of a girl there is no name. Now, I must mention, girls have many miles, as we'll see. But as the Rashba in Chelik Dalet Siman Ayin Zayin explains, that the bracha of Atoiv HaMeitiv is the fact that someone has a son, as the Lashon of the Gemara in Ksubah Samach Daled, Chutra liyada umara lekfura. There's a special mile in having a son. The son takes care of the ongoings in the house. He helps the father walk when he gets older. He's there for the kfura. In other words, girls have many milas, don't get me wrong. But there's a special bracha toiv ha'meitiv. It's good for me and good for my wife. And that's said only on a boy. The implication is, on the birth of a girl, l'chayra, there is no bracha to be said. And the emes is, there's no mention in Gemara and Shulchan Aruch about a name for a baby girl. More so, the Rashbam, one of the Rishonim in Parashas Vayetze and Perek Lamed Pasuk Chaf Aleph, he points out that the pasuk is v'acha after when Leah was born, Vatikra Shma Dina. You look at the pasuk, there's no mention of Haida'ah. Zokt the Rashbam, because there is no Haida'ah when a girl is born. The Shach Ala Torah points out something incredible, and he says that really, Bas Tchilah Siman Yafa Labanim. When a girl is born, it's a great Simcha. But Leah was born after her brothers were born. The Maila of a Bas Tchilah is she could take care of her brothers. Leah was born later. There was no... I'm sorry, Dina was born later. There was no reason for this. But be that as it may, there is no makar in Gemara or Shulchan Aruch to make a bracha on the birth of a girl. And indeed, the Aruch HaShulchan in the beginning of Reish Chav Aleph says you make a bracha on a boy, but there's no bracha said on the birth of a girl. And the truth is that a girl is not a modern, a new type of shayla. They had girls in times of the Gemara. Why is there no mention of any bracha? However, as Yutaka asked, there is a different way of looking at it. If you buy a new talis, says the Ramah, you make a Shehecheyanu. And if you have a new daughter, and especially when you see your daughter, Hayal al das, there's no bracha. And as early as the Rav in Seder Birchas Hanan and Yud Beis, he says if you see your newborn daughter, you're allowed to make a bracha Shehecheyanu. The Mishnah Berurah is more famous for this chiddush. In Reish Chav Gimel, Sif Cotton Beis, he says there's no Toiv HaMeitiv on the birth of a girl, but nearly Pashut. that the first time you see a daughter, you make a Shehecheyanu. The Migara, it's not worse than you seeing a friend that you didn't see in a long time. The Mishnah Berurah in Reish Chafei Sif Katan Hey again says that, and he mentions a Prima Godim. But I must be honest, as Chaim Kanievsky points out, the Prima Godim says you make a Shehecheyanu when you see your child for the first time. Could be the Prima Godim is talking about when you see the son for the first time. But the Mishnah Berurah is the one that is known that on the birth of a girl you make a Shehecheyanu. The Netziv in Mirai Meisada in Brachas Nun Dalid also says such a chiddush, but he says maybe a bracha is not said. So let's be clear. The Mishnah Berurah definitely holds to make a Shehecheyanu on the birth of a girl, and the Rav seems to say that, and that's why I saw the Ksais HaShulchan in Samach Vav Beis, based on the Rav, you make a Shehecheyanu on when you see your daughter for the first time. That was the minhag of the Munkacha, the Dagachayim V'Shalom, Reish Nun Vav, when his daughter was born, he made a Shehecheyanu. The Steipler, Orchos Rabbeinu, Aleph Tzadik Beis, and the Shevet HaLevi, Ches Lamrei, the Tzitz Eliezer, Yud Gimel Chaf, all accept this as normative halacha. On the birth of a girl, you make a Shehecheyanu. I saw a very nice letter from Rabbi Ram Ganachovsky. He wished the Talmud Mazel on the birth of a girl. Im al mamay mevarchim Shehecheyanu al nefesh yikara loy kolshkein. So we could see definitely that minhag. Why is that mentioned in Gemara Shulchan Aruch? Zok Rav Moshe and Chelekei Simon Mem Gimel Sif Katan Hey Adrabah. Because it's so pashit, doesn't have to be fair to the Gemara. The Gemara speaks about buying a new purchase, seeing a friend. Pashit, you make on the birth of a girl. Rav Moshe also says, the fact that Mishnah Berurah says, nirali pashit, had it been a machlaikis, he should have mentioned something. So I must tell you that that's why many do make a Shehecheyanu on the birth of a girl. That's the Mishnah Berurah twice, Rav Moshe says that, but many Hasidim don't make a Tova Meitiv on the birth of a boy. So certainly there's no bracha said on a girl. The Alicha Shleima and Tefillah Chav Gimel Ha'ara 42, he says the minhag is not like the Mishnah Berurah. So like we could say, Elu ve'elu divra lekim chayim, the ik is to feel the Simcha on the birth of every child. The same applies, Grada, to a mother. If you go with the Mishnah Berurah's psak that the man makes a Shehecheyanu, avad it's pashit that the woman, the mother, also makes a Shehecheyanu. Ma'isha, it's a true story. Someone did not see the baby after birth, and right after his wife was resting, so he decided he's going to go to the nursery and make a bracha on his daughter. He had to figure out exactly which was his daughter. It looks like me, it looks like my father, my shveri. Now people have these dimyonis. He made the Shehecheyanu, and then he was told he made a bracha on the wrong baby. So it was a yaitzu with that bracha. So I think there's a beautiful nafkamina, because if he made a Tova Meitiv is on the Psura Tova, even if you don't see it, as I state in Mishnah Berurah. So the Tova Meitiv you could say without seeing it, or seeing the wrong baby, and it would be yaitza. But Shehecheyanu is fundamentally different. It's a bracha on the re'iyah. So it makes sense, the wrong re'iyah, you're not yaitza, and you have to make a second bracha. And I found Rav Vosn Chelik Ches Lamed Hey very briefly says he made a bracha on the wrong baby, avad he has to repeat the bracha. Now, if someone had twins, he had a boy and a girl, and he sees both of them, it's pretty mistavra to say he should make a Tova Meitiv and include the girl. Because don't forget, the bracha on a girl is machlaikis. So if you're seeing both, you could say Tova Meitiv, and that would include the girl as well. I found that Taras Yoledes Lamed Zayin Dallas is a bigger chiddush. If he hears about the birth of twins, boy and a girl, he can make on the B'sura Tova and include the girl. Now that he says Adayin Sarchi, and I understand why. Because you don't find the Tova Meitiv on the news of a birth of a girl. But in our case, I think makes more sense. He can make a Tova Meitiv on both when he sees both, and this way he avoids shilas. If you have a person that has twin girls, avad, the one Shehecheyanu, when he sees both of them, covers both, just like one Tova Meitiv covers twin boys. What's a little more challenging when a person has a first granddaughter, is there any bracha to be said? So the emphasis, the Sefer Chassidim in Taf Saf Mem Gimel, about a Zokin Echad, he heard about his Einikel being born, his son's son, And he was so happy, he made a toiva meitiv. Now, usually toiva meitiv only for the father. And then someone asked him, how do you make a toiva meitiv if it's not your son? He says, anybody that has a baby and I'm happy, I make a toiva meitiv. So now we see a bigger chiddush. Even a toiva meitiv that's designated for the birth of a son, mara lechutra and mara for kfura, he's making an unainical. However, the halacha in the beginning of Reish Chav Gimel quotes a Rashba that a toiva meitiv is only for a child, not for a grandchild. And it seems from the stimas of Mishnah Berurah that on an einikel there's no bracha to be said. However, and here we wonder, let's say someone had his first granddaughter, and he sees his first granddaughter. L'chayra, that's not worse than the Mishnah Berurah's chiddush of the first time he sees his daughter. If in fact he's very happy with the birth of a granddaughter, why not say Shehecheyanu? The Mishnah Berurah says not to make a toiva meitiv, that I understand. Toiva meitiv is on the benefit of a son who helps the father walk and brings him to kfura. And I did see Rav Shlomo Zalman, Alicha Shlomo, Chav Gimel, Sivkat and Yudalid. He says on a granddaughter, you don't make a bracha. Even on a daughter is already machlokes. But l'chayr mistavra is that if indeed someone has a great simcha when he sees the birth of a newborn granddaughter, it's like gara from any other new purchase that he makes a Shehecheyanu. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman himself, when he saw his first granddaughter, this is quoted in Licha Shleima, he asked him to bring 2 wines, and he made a toiv meitiv on the wine, and he patted the granddaughter. The point is, every child is a source of great bracha, and it should be acknowledged in any way. Is there a chiyuv on the aviyah ben bi'abas to get an aliya? So pashtus, why get an aliya? But there are 2 reasons why the aviyah bas should get an aliya, and this is important. The halacha, there's a minhag, but it's really based on halacha, that the first time the woman after childbirth leaves the home, she should go to a shul and quote, hear a davar shebekadusha. Now let me explain that a little better. Lamaisa, there is a machlokes gedolei haposkim if a yoledes after childbirth makes a goimel. The emphasis a yoledes underwent a great sakana. She's for the first 3 days, even after the childbirth, she's still in sakana. She's mechuyev to eat on Yom Kippur. You're allowed to mechal Shabbos when necessary. So just like after every sakana there's a goimel, shouldn't it be that women after childbirth make a goimel? And that's the minhag of Svardim, and that's the minhag of Yerushalayim. A woman after childbirth stands in the Ezras Nashim, and she calls out the Bracha of goimel, and 10 men that are there answer what they have to answer. It's not the minhag in Chutz La'aretz. I never figured out, why Eretz Yisrael yes, Chutz La'aretz not. They say because it's not tzniistic, but I think Eretz Yisrael is more tzniistic than Chutz La'aretz, so it needs more of a hezbah. But whatever the case is, there's definitely a reason to make goimel after childbirth. But the minhag, at least in Chutz La'aretz, is not to. Zokte El Yerabba, in Reish Yutes Sivkat, quoting the Toras Chaim de Kadmon on Sanhedrin Sadik Dalid, that really she should be saying some type of a goimel, haidah. But she doesn't. But we do the second best thing. The husband gets an aliyah. The wife answers Baruch Hashem Mevorach Lo'ilam Voed, and that's bimkoim goimel, like the pasuk in Tehillim, Hoidu Loi Baruch Hu Shemai. That's the Toras Chaim de Kadmon. Now the way, if you learn it carefully, he says to say Amen also. Besides saying Baruch Hashem Mevorach, say Amen. But the ikar is that the goimel, the aliyah of the husband, is a chatimtza for her to be a goimel. And that's the way the Sha'ar Ephraim in Dalet Chav Ches explains that when the husband knows the wife is in shul after childbirth, he gets an aliyah to be the vehicle of her goimel, and she answers appropriately. Now sometimes it's not shaykh, because in a shul there might be a bigger chiyuv, so at least she hears Baruch Hu for Shachris or Ma'ariv, and she answers the same Baruch Mevarach Lo'ilam Voed, Haidu Loi Baruch Hu Shemai. Many people have the minhag, they bring a minyan to the Yoledis' house on Matzoi Shabbos, and they have a Baruch Hu, and she says her response. The B'tzeil HaChachma says, if even this is too hard, let the husband go to shul and get an aliyah. even if she's not there, and then she could be yoitza with his aliya. But I think it's kedai to mention, because women do make an effort to go to shul after Leda, and they don't know why they're going. They're not going only to go out the first time to advar davar kedusha. That's one minhag. But more importantly, there's a minhag when they go to shul to answer some type of baruch, and that would be a bimkaim of the goimel. So lamaisa, we could say that there is no chiyuv on the husband to get aliyah per se, but it's a way of having a goimel for the wife. Now lamaisa, if he comes the next morning after the baby's born and Thursday he wants an aliyah, he doesn't have to get it. There's no reason for him to get an aliyah when she's not there. That's pashut. The Magen Avram does say in the end of Reish Pei Beis that the woman, the husband of the aledas that comes to shul has kedima even over yartzeit. Now today that wouldn't happen. I mean, yartzeits think that they dominate the aliyahs, but basically that's how much the chiyuv of a husband when the wife is in shul. He's a chiyuv in a certain sense more than even a baal yartzeit. There's also a minhag that 40 days after Zacha is born or 80 days after Nekeva is born, the husband is mechuyev in aliyah, because that's a time when the woman would have to bring a carbon. The Minchas Alaza in Mukher Archaim, Siman Reish Pei Beis, he said that the only time the husband gets an aliyah is on Shabbos. But during the week, even if the wife is there, there's no reason to get an aliyah. Now, he has an interesting kiddush. He's medayik in the lashon of the Levush Magen Avram, that the only time there's an aliyah and the husband is on Shabbos. And he says, why? He says, what's taka the school of an aliyah? Just getting an aliyah? The school is after the aliyah, they make him a sheberech, and he gives money for tzedakah. That's the real school. So he says, during the week, there's no sheberech, there's no giving tzedakah. If there's no tzedakah, forget about the aliyah. So that's interesting that when you hear a skula, there's always meaning to it. And the greatest skula is tzedakah tatzal mimaves. The husband makes a pledge to give tzedakah for the taiva of his wife and the new baby. Of course, in all of these inyanim, the klal of all klalim based on the Magen Avram and Nun Gimel Sivka and Chavav, ein l'skaiter avor shum mitzvah. Even if you deserve an aliyah, you have to get an aliyah. If someone else wants it and he's getting upset, then just be mavater. It's never worth fighting for any minhag, even a mitzvah. The Magen Avram's lashon ein l'skaiter avor shum mitzvah, and certainly not to fight for a minhag. Very often a person davens in a big beis medrash, and there are a few husbands that their wife had a baby and they want to give a name. There's not shach, they also get aliyah. So the minhag is that they go up to the Torah, and after someone else aliyah, they make him a sheberech and they give a name. So again, the name giving of a girl does not require an aliyah. It's more of a goimel for the wife. The big question is, when do you give the name? So there are 4 choices: Monday, Thursday, Shabbos, or Shabbos afternoon. So this is quite of an arichis, but to make a long story short, there are many gedolim that felt you give the name as soon as possible. The Bnei Yissaschar is quoted as saying that when you give a name, you're mamshech the kiddush Yisrael on the child. So why wait? There's another lashon. The name is Mechaya the Yeled, or I saw a lashon, you don't leave a neshama without a name. But there are definitely gedolim that held that a name for a girl is given as soon as possible. Rav Moshe and Even Ezer Gimel Lamed Hey, Rav Ozna, and that was the opinion of the Stipler. As soon as possible, don't leave a neshama without a name. Now the emphasis, you look in the Torah, Rav Moshe says this as well, they gave a name after the baby was born. They didn't wait for laining, they didn't give it by laining. It's the father's option of giving a name. So one minhag is to give the name as soon as possible. But as we know, many insisted on waiting for Shabbos. Why Shabbos? So on a simple level, you have a good piece of cake, you put away for Shabbos. You have a Simcha, put away for Shabbos. Zach Hashem Shabbos the Kachay, based on the Torah and Reish Mem Beis. But it's probably deeper than that. And basically, when a name is given, we'll soon see this based on the Drisha, that's when the child, the girl, gets a neshama. Just like by a bris, the nusach that the father says by the bris, that by the bris and the name, the child gets the neshama kedosha. So by a girl, there's no bris. She gets the neshama kedosha when she gets a name. No, when's the best time to bring a neshama kedosha? On Shabbos. Say the kedusha of Shabbos, especially if it's near the Sefer Torah. The Welt says, and Taka many gedolim were makbid never to help give advice to a father what name to give. Why? Because when the father gives a name, there's a Ruach HaKodesh. No, what's the best time that the father hopes for Ruach HaKodesh? Shabbos, Kedusha Shabbos. It's more mesugal, but there's a very important lashon I want to read because we're going to use it as we proceed. The Taimei minhag Amid Shin Tzadik Zayin quotes from a sefer Ma'or HaGadol, and he says that there's a tzas mitzvah to make a kiddush when the name for a girl is given. Ki ba neshama kedoshim ha'olam ha'elyon, and that's like the kriyas shem by a boy. So therefore, b'nei elyon hayoydim bizeh make a yomtiv, a kiddush. In other words, the giving of the name for a girl is like the kriyas shem by a boy. And we'll soon use that appreciation of the kriyas shem. Now, some also add that we have to be mefarsim this girl's name. When else do you have an opportunity? You know, when a boy is bar mitzvah, you make it bar mitzvah, you give him an aliya. There's pirsim for the name all the time. But when is there pirsim for the girl's name? So if you're doing it, at least do it the best time where there's the biggest oilam, and that's Shabbos. Now, there is a minhag, some insist on waiting at least 3 days before giving a name. I saw the Betzina Rav Chelik Ches Lamed Gimel. He says, wait 3 days and give it even on Monday and Thursday. I mean, typically that's a Thursday, but before 3 days, Al Pisoid is like the Kiddush Levana before 3 days. Some wait 5 days. That was the minhag of Shamal and Belza. I saw the Minchas Yitzchak Dalekov Zion explains. But there is a minhag, Taka, in this Heilige Makom, the minhag of Stalin, is to give it the second Shabbos. Now, the Pasha de Cheshbon is that you have to wait at least 8 days to pass by. You have to go through a Shabbos. So the first Shabbos is not the right day. And you want to wait for Shabbos, so make it the second Shabbos. Some also add that the Gemara says the first few days, the first 7 days, the 8th day of the Milah, it's inappropriate that everybody's happy and the mother's not happy because she underwent childbirth. So wait, Taka, the 8 days before you give a name for the girl, but then you can't give it before Shabbos. So it's always going to be coming out the second Shabbos. I saw a number of poskim discuss, let's say the child is born Shabbos morning after davening. So if you hold you have to have 3 or 5 days, you can't give it for mincha. But many gedolim said Shabbos is the right day. Even if the child was born that day, you should even give it Shabbos mincha. Don't wait till a Monday or Thursday. A child was born on Sunday, and Thursday is a Yom Tiv. So you have 3 days, you have 5 days in fact, but is Yom Tiv the right choice? Those that insist you have to only give a name on Shabbos would not give on Yom Tiv, because Yom Tiv is not Shabbos. But many say Kedushas Yom Tiv has its own milas, so that will leave to minhag of that particular kehila. Some will wait for Shabbos and not give it on Yom Tiv, and some will give it on Yom Tiv because Yom Tiv has the qualities, the milas of Shabbos. It reminds me of Kiddush Levana. You know, you ever think about Kiddush Levana? Some do it right away. Some wait 3 days, 7 days, Zayin Shleimim, Matzoi Shabbos. So giving a name has the same approach. And the ik is, you follow your own minhag, and then you know you're doing the right thing. I had a shaila where a young man had a baby, and his minhag was to give it the first Monday or Thursday, which is Thursday. He told me his father, who knew that the girl's being named after his father's mother, wanted very much to be by the Kriyas Shem. And the Kriyas Shem would be Thursday, he couldn't be there. Should he give the name on Shabbos so the father could be there? I said, what's the shaila? You know, minhag Thursday versus Shabbos a minhag. But kibbut of is chamur sheba chamurais. In other words, the point is, there's no issa in giving a name different than your minhag. It's a minhag. But then again, kibbut of is much more than a minhag. Or shalom bayis, sometimes the wife wants to be by the name and she can't be there on Monday and Thursday, but she will try to make it there for Shabbos. You know, like everything else, you have to have seichel and a good dosage of what the Mesilas Yesharim calls mishkol hachasidus. So had it been an issa, so you can't play around with the surim. But each minhag has a makar and halacha. So basically, do your minhag unless there's another consideration. Then you have to know what to do. The point is, and this is important to mention, it's not just you're giving a name. Let me quote the lashon of the Drisha in Yeridei at the end of Simon Shin Samach. He says there that when there's a chasen and a newborn baby, the minhag then was the chasen went to the baby's house and they gave the name and then they were mesamech the chasen. Why? Zok the Drisha, and I'm quoting his lashon, because Kriya Shem Labanais is like the Makom Kriya Shem by a Zachar, by a Mila. And just like the Mila goes before Sameach Chasen V'Kala, so too, giving a girl's name goes before Sameach Chasen V'Kala. So the Chasen V'Kala have to go to the baby's house, and then they go to their Simcha. So the Drisha L'Halach is writing that the Kriya Shem of a girl is like the Kriya Shem of a boy, which of course gives it much more significance. That's very similar to what we said earlier from the Mor HaGadol. Rav Moshe and Even Ezer Dal Kuf Beis also says this. He says that the Kriya Shem was always done b'kedusha. That's why you do it by the Sefer Torah. And therefore we have to appreciate that unique schus of giving a name. Rather, by some Hasidim, the minhag is Ad HaYom that the Rebbe gives the Bracha, the Kriya Shem. After all, it's like the Kriya Shem of a Zachar. I'll tell you an interesting story. When my daughter was born, so we gave the name Thursday in the yeshiva. So right before davening, someone told me, he told me about this Drisha, and he says, go ask Rapam to give the name to your daughter. So I didn't think twice, maybe I should have. So I went up to Rapam and said, maybe Shiva give the name. He says, me? Usually it's the Gabai's job. But if you want, I'll do it. I think my daughter's the only one that has a name given by Rapam. But Lamaisa, I figured out later that it's not done, it wasn't done. I'll tell you very simply why. Gedolim, as it is, are overburdened with trying to learn, fundraising, Siddur Kedushins and Sandikois. Another thing to keep them busy, forget it. They'll be flying to Eretz Yisrael for Kriya Shem for a girl. So it's just not the right thing. I did it, but Baruch Shem, no one learned from me. My Pam Gada once told me that's why he never started giving haircuts to 3-year-olds. He said, I'm busy enough as it is, but to start this, I really won't learn a word. So Lamaisa, this is the minhag, but again, those that have the minhag that the Adam Gadol gives the name, it's very much makes sense al pi halacha. As far as the nusach that you give the Kriyas Hashem, so this is interesting. If you look in the Siddur, it seems to be a little mixed up. I'll explain what I mean. Mishaberach for the Yoledes, ve'ez bitan od l'mazel tov, v'kar shma b'Yisrael, b'avosha bayla v'aviyah yitin tzedakah. So Rav Moshe and Chelik Dal and Archaim, Simon Samach Zayin points out that the nusach has 2 different objectives mixed up. First you make a Mishaberach, together with the Kriya Shem, and then you make the pledge, which l'chara goes back to the Mishaberach. So Rav Moshe says, why not do one thing at a time? And Rav Moshe's nusach, he wrote a different nusach. First you make the full Mishaberach with the Bavush Sheyitain, because that's typical Mishaberach. You give a pledge. Then he added, Vesbid anod l'mazel tov, lo'erech yomim v'shanim, yikar shma b'Yisrael, plain ben plaini, v'yiska via v'imo l'gadol l'chuppah, u'lamaisim toivim. Now, there's 2 chidushim in this nusach. First of all, he divided it, and also he left out l'gadol l'toira. So Moshe does add, if you want, you could add yiska l'gadol l'toira, u'la ben toira, u'l'chuppah l'maisim toivim. Now that was nice, because our girls today learn a lot. And I found Rav Hutna in a letter says our minhag is to stress l'gadol l'toira, because our minhag is that girls say birchas HaTorah every morning. So they have a shaychus to limud HaTorah, and therefore it's appropriate to say l'gadol l'toira, ula ben Torah, one or the other, or both. Now Rav Moshe then explains the problem he has with the regular nusach. It's 2 thoughts that are combined. But Lamaisa, each Kehila, of course, follows their minhag. Is there an inyan to give a kiddush after the Kriyas Hashem? So avada by a bris, there's a chiyuv suda. But now we see that maybe a kiddush for a girl is also appropriate. Since the Kriyas Shem is like the Kriyas Shem by a bris, I can't say it's exactly like a bris, but there's a good reason to make a kiddush. But what's interesting is, Reb Chaim Kanievsky found the makar for giving a kiddush based on a Dogel Merivava on the page in Yeridei at the end of Kuf Ayin Ches. Dogel Merivava wonders, the Shalom Zocher that we make for a Zocher, the Lashon of Taisvis is, because the baby was saved from the Leda. Leda could be a dangerous situation. So it's sort of like a Bracha of Shevach that we make a Suda of a Shalom Zocher. So Freg the Noid Yehuda in Dogel Merivava, so why don't we make a Shalom Nekeva? She's also saved from the childbirth. So Reb Chaim says maybe that's the source of a kiddush that's like the girl's Shalom Zocher. But the kasha is, if it's supposed to be like a Shalom Zocher, why don't we make the kiddush at night? Like the Shalom Zocher. So I saw in the Sefer Per David a beautiful pshat, Pashat Pshat. Because really it's also after the giving of the name. So Shabbos day is more appropriate than Friday night. So the kiddush is, first of all, for the Kriyas Shem, but it's also a haidah that the child survived the childbirth. So it's really two purposes. Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky and Emes Yakov and Simon Reish Sadik insisted that if that's the case, that it's together with the Kriyas Shem, it only makes sense to give a kiddush after the Kriyas Hashem. Some people give a name one Shabbos and make a kiddush when convenient weeks later. So Yaakov says, Avos mana bata karbonai. But it could be the kiddush is, like we said, that's like a form of a shalom nekeva, that the child survived. But Lamais, it's certainly more reasonable that the kiddush should be the same time after the Kriyas Hashem. Also, some in fact add that just like the Sudas Pidyon Aben lefarsim, the mitzvah Pidyon Aben, there should be a Suda lefarsim the girl's name, because there's no other chance. She doesn't get aliyas, there's no bar mitzvah. The Debetzina Rav, in fact, in Chelech Ches Lamed Gimel says on Shabbos there should be a kiddush, and during the week something, maybe a l'chaim, something to mark the greatness of the Kriyas Hashem. There's someone that I know who had a few older girls, daughters, singles, over 30, and I remember like yesterday, a number of years ago, he heard a quote from the Stipler that sometimes a girl can't find the shidduch because the father didn't make a kiddush when she was born and didn't get the bracha, yiskel lagad l'chuppah. So this father decided that he has to make a kiddush. So unfortunately his daughters were quite embarrassed, but he had girls over 30 that had a kiddush for their birth, 30 years earlier. So it left an impression, obviously. But I'm going to tell you, Rabbi, I have a friend of mine, he's rather related to the Stipler, and he wrote to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, this goes back around 20 years ago, is this story true? That's what the Stipler said. So I wrote down the exact lashon Reb Chaim responded to my friend. I saw my own eyes. Reb Chaim responded, Lo shamati davazeh, v'ani lo yasisi kiddush lebenoisai, v'adoni avi moiv Rabbi zatzal lo amali lasois. So Reb Chaim himself found the source for the kiddush, but he didn't make a kiddush. So why do I say this? I still hear adayim, people say, oh, I got to make a kiddush, my daughter, I got to make a kiddush now. Don't worry about that. That's not the problem. The Stipler never said this, like many other things that officially b'shmoi. Now, l'maisa, I'm not saying the Stipler was against making a kiddush. Chaim did make a kiddush. But one thing probably Rabbi Stipler would not be happy when the kiddush gets out of hand. It becomes a lavish affair. It's something that people give new meaning to the word kedusha rabbah, as if it has to be some type of elaborate affair. The money that's used for a kiddush can be used to help poor people and many other needs. There's no chiyuv suda, but there is a chiyuv suda after the kiddush. And when someone comes over after the kiddush, I can't look at food, so that's a bittul suda Shabbos, and also a terrible bezoyin to his wife. She made suda, he's not eating it. So obviously a kiddush has to be, like we say, ein katega nasa sanega. It has to be a schus and not chas v'shalom fakert. Rav Sternbuch in the Tshuva Chelik Beis, Kuf Lamed Beis, warns about making an elaborate kiddush. Besides that, it creates an ayin hara. It's connected really the purpose of the kiddush. I once got a beautiful invitation to a bar mitzvah. I'll never forget it. They had it written in big letters, Tefillah Rabbah Koydem HaKiddush. Now that's a wonderful minhag. You know, the focus on the Tefillah Rabbah, but the Kiddush Rabbah part, we could skip the Rabbah part. We all know the word Kiddush Rabbah has nothing to do with a big Kiddush. Kiddush Rabbah is a Lashon Saginar because the Kiddush is short. A challenging question, can you name a girl after a man? Lamashal, true story. Someone's father's name was Boruch, and he had a girl. He was afraid he wouldn't have a boy. Can he name his daughter Bracha? You could have Yehuda, Yehudis, Tzvi, Tivya, Don, Dina, Chana, will soon see Chana, Bensi, and Basion. So the emphasis, there is a big chiddush of the Divrei Malkiel, the Lam Zerav, and Chelik Gimel Ayin Hey. He Bechlal wonders how we could have, which we do have, a name shared by boys and girls. The mashal, the name Yoina is sometimes used for a girl. Simcha is a girl's name. The Chasam Sofer's daughter was named Simcha. Simcha, Yoina, Alta is given boys and girls. So the Makil wonders, maybe that's a problem of Layil, a Silbash, Simlas, Gever. Have one name for both. Maybe that's a violation of that Issa. Okay. Then I saw an amazing Arichus in the Tshuva Sherlin V'Darshan Gimel Mem Hey. He says Reb Chaim Kanievsky gave him the information. He collected 30 places that there was names shared by both boys and girls. This Reb Chaim's Bekiyas Lahafli, but he shows list exactly Ma'amakoimis. Besides Yoina, Simcha, and Alta. So that doesn't seem to be a problem of La Yilbash. But there's an interesting problem. I wouldn't have thought of this, but when I learned the sugya, I want to share with you. And that is adjusting a name, like I said, giving a girl Bracha after the Zay de Baruch. Why not? The emphasis, there's a famous anicle of the Shinava, of Chana Kolashitza, was named after the Baba Chana. So you see Chana for Chana. So why not Bracha for Baruch? So here we see an interesting thing. Minhag Yisrael Torah. The Stipler gave his daughter, I think she's still alive, Yusfa, after Azay the Yosef. In fact, the Stipler told someone to name a girl Elisheva after the Chazanish. What's the Shaykhis? You look at Elisheva, it has most of the letters are from Arvam Yeshaya. So I could definitely say it's done to give names for boys after girl or vice versa. But here's the chiddush that I saw, that basically to give a name of a girl after a man might be more of a problem. Why? Lamashal, to give Chaya for Chayim is a problem. What's wrong with Chaya for Chayim? So first of all, you're taking a man's name and putting it to a girl. That's Hirada B'Kedusha. Chayim had many more mitzvahs than Chaya has. And Taka, the Priya Soda, Chelik Gimel Yud Zayin, he says to name a girl after a man, Hirada B'Kedusha. But the bigger chiddush, and I saw this in Paiskim, the story, the Munkacha, the Mechas Loza told this story. It's interesting, he didn't say which gadol, but he said a person he knew, a Kalman Kahana, did not have children for many years. So he went to a Groisa Yid, and he looked at the Kvittel, and he says, how could two Zacharim have a boy, child? So he goes, oh, I see. The name is Chaya. Your wife is Chana, but you named me after Chaya. How could two boys have a child? Apparently, when you name after a man, it has somewhat of a man remaining in the name, and he can't have a child. So this God will change the name, the woman's name, from Chaya to a different name, and they had many children. And I saw in the Bris Avos, Ches Lamed Zayin, Lefia Mekubalim, it's not a good idea to name a girl after a man, because maybe she can't be moiled. Now, again, this is way out of my range, but the Paiskim say this la'aloch. Now, Lamaisa, what I was thinking, other Gedolim, you saw the Stipler was a makbid. Could be it's totally in a different, fascinating Shaila. We had this Shaila more than once, where a baby was born, and before the bris, a zayda was nifta. And the question was, the bris goes before the kvura, is that takas nefesh? So if it's takas nefesh, that this bracha is getting the neshama of Boruch, then I can understand why it's a problem of having children. But the way the Mechzalazon assumed it's not a takas nefesh, so what's the problem? Maybe that's the Machlekes Taliyin. The Tzitz Eliezer and Zayim Amtes Yud Gimel has a nice discussion. We could say the following: what the Shineva did gave Chana after Chana, that's not a problem. That's Malim b'Kiddush, and there's no problem of the Ilada. But to give a girl after a man has two problems. But there's more of a concern giving a girl after a man than fakert. The next question, which happens pretty often, they decide, no, they'll be saimach lahakol, they'll give the girl bracha after Baruch. What happened a few years later? They have a boy. Now can you give this boy Baruch? You already gave the name Bracha to his sister. We don't give two Baruchs, one name per neshama. So the Tzitz Eliezer and Yud Aleph Nun Vav discusses this, and he quoted a Divrei Malkiel that says maybe you shouldn't give Baruch because you already gave Bracha. Now I think the same shaila. If giving a name is at takas neshama, so one name per nifta, so Bracha is enough. Baruch doesn't work. But he says, Blamaisa, it's a different name. But he had Eliezer and Eliezri, but Baruch maybe now is better than Bracha. So again, it's questionable if you're allowed to do that. So basically, it's a suffix if you're allowed to give a boy after you gave a girl the name after that Zayd. Typically, by girls, there's another issue to mention, and that is what the Stipler quoted the Chazin Ish, and it's a number of svarim that be careful, don't give a girl a name that she'll be embarrassed when she gets older. Now again, we're boys, we don't understand this so well, but there are many Yiddish names that girls are simply embarrassed from. Now, the Stipler in Orchos Rabbeinu has a list. I'm not going to read the list because many of us have those names. But the Stipler felt in Eretz Yisrael to give Yiddish names is already a no-no, because Yiddish was not used, especially in Bnei Brak, so much, and it's embarrassing. And he felt always change the Yiddish name to a Lashon Kodesh name, Mashal Gittel, Toiva. So the Stipler was not too in favor of giving Yiddish names. I know someone from a Chashuv Mishpacha, her name was Babcha, and she left in Savo, don't name any baby after me. I had enough problems when I was growing up. Now, nothing wrong with the name Babcha, don't get me wrong, but that was a Ma'aseh Shehecheyanu. I kibbut ava aim. This is kibbut aim, true. But then again, a child has to live with a name. So from adult perspective, what's wrong? It's a Yiddish name. My Baba had it, and it's kibbut av. That's nice. But you have to think from a child's perspective. I want to tell you a merdika ma'isa. I was in yeshiva together with someone who his name in yeshiva, they called him Davy. Fine. His brothers, his parents called him Beryl. So I once asked him, what's that? They have two different names? So he says, no, I was always called Beryl. I came to yeshiva in the younger grades, I forgot which grade, maybe second or third grade, punked his Rebbe when he gave a mashal of a story. Who was the mashal? Beryl. Beryl jumped off the roof, and Beryl was making trouble, and Beryl's dying, and Beryl's Chevron. And he Pasha couldn't take it, because he saw Beryl as me. So this child in the younger grade, I think it was second or third grade, on his own, changed his name. Davy. Look how sensitive a young child is. That's why Rabbi have to try to find a different name than calling, Ruvain and Shimon, because there's always a Reuven in the class. But the point is, giving a name the child will be embarrassed with is not a good idea. And other Gedolim said the same thing. Now, Lamaisa Kibbut Aim is a mitzvah, so try to adjust the name. There are ways of changing the name to make it more user-friendly. Gold Zahava. But the Stipler, again, had a problem with Yiddish name, the child will be embarrassed. But if you have a shaila, ask someone that understands that child's age. You have to know the age and know when indeed it will be embarrassing. And we can say, last but not least, what I think is the most challenging question, is someone had a number of boys. They didn't have a girl yet. Is it right? Is he allowed to daven that the Baruch should give him a girl? Is that a right thing al pi hashkafa? So the emphasis is that in the Brich Shemay, which is of course by the Zoya, there is a line, V'seyav li benin dichrin da'avdin re'usach. Please give me sons that will do your ratzim. Now, I know it's in parentheses, but many say that. So obviously, there's a mile in having a son over a daughter. Also, who said you have a right to ask the Bernstein what child you want? But then again, his taina was not kind of mitzvah puravu. You have to have a zach and a keva. In other words, if it's a convenience, it's not so pashut. But he wants to have the mitzvah of puravu. So this really brings us to a more fundamental question, and that is there any maila of a boy over a girl, la halacha, and this halacha l'mais? So avada, we all know, after 40 days, the Gemara says in Brachis, in Shulchan Aruch Reish Lamed, you can't daven for the gender of a girl because it's already a done deal. It's a tefillah shav. We're talking about before 40 days, before conception. So I think this has to be addressed because people, unfortunately, don't have the right attitude. Every child is precious. I saw a quote from a gadol, "But davdangim fayeda negala und yeda harala," from a child. Boy, girl, makes no difference. A gesundte child, every hair and every nail is precious. You know, when I hear people saying, "Oh, another boy, another girl," I want to tell them, just visit a childless couple or as an older single and tell them your quote problems. You'll get a good psak or two. So every child is precious. Every hair and every nail of a child is precious. But you look in the chazal, you might get mixed messages about what's a preference. Every day we all say, men say, shleisani isha, that a boy is better than a girl. Well, a toiva meitiv on a boy is not really a raya, because that's really the son's function as moral l'chutra and moral l'kfura. But basically, there's a Gemara in 3 places, and this is noteworthy. Bava Basra, Tezayin, Kedushin, Pei Beis, Mabeis, Psachim, Samachei, Ef Shel Oilam, B'lai Zcharim, B'lai Nekevos, Ashrei mi shebanav Zcharim, Oilai lemi shebanav Nekevos. Which many boys check with their sisters, woe was to us that we have girls. Now, today with the shidduch crisis, avada, a son is easier to marry off. And I got to found the Rambam in the Geras. He writes that when you get a daughter, your hair turns white until you find her a shidduch. So it seems that there was a shidduch crisis at times of the Rambam as well. The Gemara Takin Sanhedrin, Kuf Amid Beis, says when a person has a daughter, he doesn't sleep at night. Maybe she'll do Averis, maybe that. It's harder to raise a girl. Bekitza, I saw this taka in one of the Kadmoinim. Zacha is gematria bracha. Nekeva with a yud is gematria biklala. Now I don't mean to say that as truth, lamaisa, but that's what one of the Kadmoinim say regarding this question. But then again, we know the Gemara Nida Daf Mem Hey says the women have a bina yasera. Soitechav Beis, the Gemara says, Lamadnu yiras chet mi besula. The Maral explains, because women by nature have more of a yiras shamayim than men. I'll tell you a davar niflamoid. Did you ever wonder, when we get an aliya, they call us up, Pliny ben Pliny. When someone is sick and needs a Yeshua, they say his mother's name. Why? Zok Tchilah in Berkei Yosef, Simareish Pei Dalid, because you're better off if you need schusim with your mother. Because every man has 2 averas that are sometimes unavoidable, Bittul Torah and Zera Levatala, which women don't have. So the Chidah said, Chazal felt that when you need schusim, you're better off going with your mother than your father. You're talking about big people. But the point is that, the Gemara says, Nashim Shananois don't have Bittul Torah, but they have Schusa Torah. So the Chidah seems to feel that it's more of a schus to go with the mother and the father. Plus, we know the famous Moran Bava Basra Kuf Mem Aleph, Bas Tchila, Siman Yafal Abanim. And what's better raya than Miriam was the oldest of the children, And look what her brothers were, Aaron and Moshe. Rabbi Aaron once had a Talmud that had 2 girls in a row. Says, oh, you are a lamdan. You have a siman muvik to have good children. Goes that sheet that two is a siman muvik. The Marsha in Gittin Nun Zayin, he points out, the Gemara says that Neshaseyim Yoldeis Zecharim Tchila. He says, but that's not a siman bracha. Because siman bracha when you have a girl first. And the truth is, in our time certainly, raising a girl is easier than raising a boy, but they're klal. It's not my kiddush. The Gemara says in Taka and Baba Basra, Kuf Mem Aleph, about the greatness of a boy. Rav Chizda said that Ladidi, girls are better. Zok Taisvis, although Rav Chizda had good sons, but his sons-in-law were Gedolei Olam. Rava, Rami Bar Chama, and I take a saw in the Sefer Meged, give us Olam, Chelik Aleph, Amid Samach. The Mechaber says he had another girl, and came to Moshe, and Moshe noticed he wasn't too happy with another girl. So Moshe says, this Lashon, was artir as ein bisschen anders wird fadir ois hadavin der Elul. So Moshe is saying a goynish shavart. Because if you have a boy, you have to raise a boy. Hopefully one day he'll become that big talmidchochom. But there's a road ahead of you. If you have a daughter, it's easier to raise her. So what do you care if someone else will raise your son-in-law? It's easier to raise a daughter than a son. And Kachavi had wonderful sons-in-law. And then Rav Moshe added what I told you from Tosfos. Rav Moshe started counting out the sons of Rav Chizda. They were great people, but didn't come close to the greatness of Rava and Mari Bar Chama, Rav Chizda's sons-in-law. In other words, if you have a daughter and you work with her carefully, you'll be zaycha to a wonderful son-in-law. The only difference is that you'll have an easier job with the daughter, and your mechut will have a hard job raising that Elul for you. So what's the artist there? That was a Moshe's taina. Then I saw, it was a little challenging at first, in the Sefer Zikaron, the Pachad Yitzchak, Rav Hutner, had only one daughter, as we know, and he said people were disappointed that he only had a girl, not a boy. So he says, I wrote them back, he wrote a letter to them, and he said that we have children as a shlichus makadosh Baruch Hu, as an asaya. And the truth is, he writes, in his times, it was 80 plus years ago, it's harder to raise a girl than to raise a boy. And I'm happy that I have a bigger challenge than other people. That's the way he justified having a girl. Now, this was inconsistent with what we said, but the emphasis is, when this happened over 80 years ago, was before the Beis Yaakovs, and then Taka, people told me that it was much harder to raise a girl. A boy had yeshiva, girl had nothing. But I did see from the Chassam Sofer, he had 3 girls in a row, and then his wife had a baby, girl, 4th girl. So he said a beautiful pshat in Arichas, I'm not going to get into the Arichas, but he said a beautiful pshat in the Gemara Bava Basra, that it's easier to raise a girl than to raise a boy. So he's happy with 4 girls. So Lamaisa, it seems that it's in a certain sense easier to raise a girl. So we have mixed messages. In fact, the Chidah says, Beraishis is Ashrei Bas. So here you have, mixed messages, girls or boys. But I think the maskana is, like I told you earlier, Yeda, Harala, Yeda, Negala, we have to be give Shevach Vaydah. The Pelayoyitz and Erech Bas writes what seemed to be a minhag in those days. It was a ridiculous minhag, that when someone had a girl, they would be roid of him, moms make fun of him. So he says, how could you do that? Boy or girl is miployis tamim deyem, and the Baruch is giving children. You're being malig on what the Baruch did? Chas v'shalom, you're unhappy with a girl or a boy, that's the Baruch decision. And he writes very strongly, it's easier to have a girl, and why they're giving a redifus to someone that had a girl. Every child is a nefesh yikara. Oy loy lemi shebanav nekevos. So here there's a vort from the Maral's brother in Sefer Chaim, in Chelik Chaim Toivim, and he says a pshat that's mamish pashat pshat. He says basically, boys have many more mitzvahs, and it should be nikah that they are boys. They're running to learn, they're running to daven. Sometimes you have a boy that's doing weibische things. He's combing his hair, looking in the mirror, worrying about his clothing. He says, that's the pshat. Oy loy lemi shebanav nekevos. He's a boy, but he's not running to shul. He's running to buy a new suit and combing his hair and looking in the mirror. So he said, that's the pshat. Avad, he says, but hayala adas, you complain about what the Baruch gave you? He writes a lashon, leich le'uman, go to the Baruch and complain. What are you complaining? Girl, boy? It can't be oy loy lemi shebanav nekevos. It's kipshuta. What are you complaining about? What the Baruch did? So basically, that's the way the Maral's brother, Goyin Oilam, teach the Gemara. Then I saw another pshat, also carved to the emes. What's that pshat? Bas ploini le ploini. The shidduch is why not ploini le ploini or bas ploini le ben ploini? So he says the pshat. He doesn't say. I don't say who the pshat Shem he said, but he said a pshat that lamaisa, as we know, adayoim, when you have a good son, the phone doesn't stop ringing for shidduch. A girl, well, she has to have yichus, money, and this and that. So really, the girl's shidduch is really not who she is, whose daughter she is, bas ploini. So he said, oy loy lemi shebanav nekevos, because you better get your act together. You better start behaving, being a nice person, make a few dollars, learn shas and poiskim. Otherwise, your daughter doesn't stand a chance. So he says, it's woe is to me, I have a daughter, because now I have to behave. So that's the pshat in oil mishaban of the kevos. No, but the emphasis, as I told you, every child is good. Can a person daven for a daughter? So I looked into this. Rav Gesund was very close to the Chazon Ish. He had a number of boys in a row, and then he wanted a girl for the mitzvah of Puruvu. So he asked the Heilige Chazon Ish, could he daven for the birth of a girl? So he says, Anders von Sidde can man nicht. You can't daven different than Sidde. The Sidde says, Yoavlan bin in dichrin. So he says, if you want, skip that line. Then I saw in a wonderful sefer, Benois Malachim quotes Rabbi Rabinovich, one of the Yonim in the Badatz Eretz Yisrael, had the same response. If you want, leave out that part of the tefillah. But I was a little disappointed because both said, don't change from what the Sidde says. But can you add your own tefillah for a girl? Maybe taka bari kashrach manu lamali. Maybe just for convenience, don't give the Baruch Shalom eitzes. But here's someone that wants to have the mitzvah approval. So I was thinking a possible raya, but it's not really a raya. I did in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Reish Lamed quotes the Gemara that you should not, that after 40 days of ready conception, you can't daven for the child. Zok levush, but toich mem yoim, you could daven for a boy, and the tefillah will help. Oh, so you see, you're allowed to daven for a gender. But that's only a raya, the daven for a boy. And that's not a chiddush. The Zohar already says, we say, v'sevlan bin dichrin. But we didn't yet see a raya brewer, you're allowed to daven for a girl. So again, I'm leaving it to people smarter than I am, but certainly if someone's davening a girl just for a personal preference, leave it to the Rebbeinu Olam. If you want to daven and you Shem Shemayim for the birth of a girl for the Shem Mitzvah, it might be an idea daven for a girl. If that's what's better for me, leave it to the Rebbeinu Olam. The ik is that we should make simchas. I'll go and talk to you all. Yeah, okay. Just we'll do the sikkim quickly. Every child is a matana yakara. Haidah for every negala and harala, that's klal 1. But there are certain halachas, boys and girls differently. Lamashal, Atayva Meitav is said for a girl, for a boy. For a girl, many make Shehecheyanu, and many don't. A mother, if the minhag, the father makes a Shehecheyanu, so does the mother as well. If we made on the wrong girl, so start again, the bracha was nachal. On twins, that you see twins, boy and girl, you could make a taiva mate of the chayra and pat the girl and avoid the shayla. There's no chiyav aliya, but if the woman is in the as is nashim, so the man's aliya is her goimel, and she should answer haydulai baruch shemai. That will be her haidah. The minimal, she has to hear a baruch and answer, or some davar shebekadusha. When to give a name, some give it the first opportunity, some wait for Shabbos, some wait 3 days, 5 days, second Shabbos. The ik is, if there's a different consideration, let that be the machriya. Significance of Kriya Shem for a girl is like Kriya Shem of a boy. We don't give gedolim to do it, but it's definitely a special chashivus. There are different nuscha'os about what the Kriya Shem is. Look in the Siddur or look in Ramoshes Tshuva. The kiddush should be a modest shevach vayda, not an elaborate kiddush. Some are makbid that they only give a kiddush when the name was given, not weeks later. Bracha for Boruch has two problems: naming a girl after a boy. Naming Boruch for Bracha is less of an issue. Some do both. We do give names, boys, girls, vice versa. That's the minhag some have as well. We don't give a name that the child will be embarrassed with. There's a maila of both boys and girls. Both deserve shevach vayda. If someone really wants to kiyum a mitzvah, perhaps he's allowed to daven for a gender, but basically leave it to the Rebbeinu Shloim, who knows what's best.
Shem English, I'd like to thank Rabbi Smith for the wonderful shir. Baruch Hashem. She allowed us simchas ba'ala and gesundheit. Miyat Hashem, this week coming up is the last week of the summer shiurim. Here in Besmedish there'll be 2 shiurim a day, 1 o'clock and 9:30 every day, Miyat Hashem. And if in the other neighbors, there's also shiurim at 9 in Flatbush and in Williamsburg. Wednesday night is the English Summer Dinner event in Flatbush Avenue K, East 29th Street. Everybody's invited, 7 o'clock to come join, to Mechazik, Irgun Shir Torah. We'll have the schus again to hear Rabbi Smith speak by the dinner, Miyat Hashem. And there Chizik, we hope to have a presentation from G'dayla Oilam, Rabbi Moshe Sternberg, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein. We hope to have the Rosh Hashiva, Reuven Feinstein coming, Zim for Moshe. And become a Chizik for Elul. The Eibishter for Eibishter Shah Bracha Vatzlocha, Rabbi Chaim Lekar Hashem, Rotzak V'Shubach Lazak Yisrael, V'Ki Heir B'nam Torah Mitzvahs, Shenem Al Anchovas Man Tzidka, Yagdel Torah V'Yadei Kaddish.
Hey.